Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your valuable time with the Adapt 2030 channel. Remember the power outages Christmas 2022? Spoke to the TVA. Incredibly helpful in interpreting the information. Replacements of fossil fuel into renewables, bringing us to an 80% reduction by 2035, but from 80% to net zero 100%. Unknown the plan, keeping reliable power versus UN mandates. Also TVA, part of the local governments for sustainability. Renewable cities and regions roadmap, climate partner program, climate neutrality. All marching towards zero emissions, no pollution. But why is nobody looking at magnetic motors using the Earth's magnetic field to generate electricity? Because this is what we're up against with AI, but at the same time, we could use this for efficiency gains in zero emission Tesla patents. We don't need rare earths with that. We only need the copper, the aluminum, the steel, the silver, which would make us less reliant on other nations and make ourselves more energy independent. And we'll start right here. Remember Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, power out in the United States, rolling brownout / blackout, whatever adjective you want to get it. Power stops for a certain amount of time intermittently and even on a schedule. Press releases from the Tennessee Valley Authority, otherwise known as TVA. Here's where it gets a little unnerving, but at the same time in a positive way that there are people working to continuously provide you with reliable power. So we know right now the highest 24-hour electricity demand supplied in TVA history on the 23rd at 740 gigawatts was not enough. If it gets close to that or reaches that point, we're going back on brownout / blackouts again. Now that was for a full 24-hour period, but the highest peak was a single hour, 33 gigawatts. The previous record was 24 gigawatts. And as would follow, if the weekend's cold, people are going to need heat on the weekend too. So we've hit the max for these 153 local power company partners with TVA, which is the reasons I called the public relations, talked to Jim Hobson, public information officer, super helpful, very well versed, very intelligent, answered everything with clarity. And I was so glad that he didn't try to beat around the bush and obfuscate and give me half answers. He gave me the truth straight away, and I so much appreciate that. Thank you, Jim, for our conversation. Started to look at the generating assets, bottom left there, and if they are indeed going to continue to cut this percentage, that percentage, this percentage per year to meet goals set out through United Nations Agenda Framework, then nuclear sites, coal-fired power plants, those are going to have to go away. Combustion turbine, it's a gray area of how much emission truly the natural gas puts out. And then we have the solar energy sites, which are going to have to expand, not doubling or tripling, but like tenfold in order to replace what is scheduled to be taken offline. And I might add on a personal note here where it says built for the people, go to the very bottom in those 40,000 miles of rivers, streams, and tributaries. They're very well kept, very well cared for. Conservation program, I know you're not allowed to build out on that even if your land, quote unquote, extends to the rivers or stream basins. Well, the conservation efforts are top notch in the United States to keep that water habitat. Have you started to notice an increase in the appearance of wrinkles, fine lines, bags under your eyes, or other unusual signs of aging? Wrinkles and other marks of aging are one of the top signs that your collagen levels are low. You can experience the healthy aging effects of collagen that it has on your skin with the help of this multi-collagen powder. I add it to my morning coffee or tea. It tastes great while keeping me a little more full between meals. I want you to try it and experience some of the same effects it's had on me. That's health with adapt2030.com, and get ready to feel your best in the new year. Welcome 2023. And now on with the video. So jumping over to the scoping report 2019, I looked at the resource plan. I thought, okay, what is this all about? The CO2 emission reductions that are set forth by United Nations framework. So let's throw some numbers onto it here. So if we look at the first bullet point, American electric power, strategy is going to be something like this. Reduce emissions 60% using the year 2000 levels by 2030. But TVA is going to adhere to 2005 levels And we're going to get to the 2030 mark, the 2050 mark, and already you can see 34% reduction all the way to 2016. So the key is sustained annual reductions moving forward to meet the targets. Now 2050 is not 90% any longer, it's zero. So you can see how it's up the ante from 2019, as well as the baseline got moved back to 2005. So if we bring forward to the 2022 Climate Adaptation Plan progress, and Jim was super clear on this, it's about providing reliable power for the TVA out to the other power companies and the 7 states. And if you look at point 5 there, TVA has reduced 57% so far of mass carbon emissions from the 2005 baseline. So what they need to do is move forward from 57 to 70% by 2030. So if we take a look at the overall reductions goals, 57% now, it's going to reach 70% in 2030. You do the math, we're in 2023. That's another 7 years, or we could even, I'll be generous, 8. 13% divided by 8 is not quite 2% per year. Reduced every single year off of the generation that we consider the most reliable. Can the substitutes come with solar panels, for example, photovoltaics? Well, you saw the storm. What kind of storm was that came rolling over, dropping all pressure records ever kept, and the fastest, steepest drop in temperature ever recorded? Solar panels don't produce in those types of conditions. Never have, never will. So if we're going to be moving over to an entirely weather-dependent system during the greatest of weather upheavals expected, especially as the magnetic field of the planet continues to decline, the magnetic wandering or polar wander for a better term, changes on our sun heading into a weak, once in a 400-year low in solar activity through solar cycle 26, 27, onsetting right now as we head off into solar minimum. Weather patterns, jet streams, cloud cells across the planet are going to move into so many tremendously different positions. What we saw as that extreme in the winter will become the normal. So moving out to 2050, then it goes from 80% to 100% or net zero over 20 years. It's 20%, so then that's another 1%, 1%, 1% per year. Now here's the interesting thing. When I talked to Jim, he was very forthcoming. Didn't try to obfuscate the answers, go around, beat around the bush. He was very clean. Like they literally don't have a plan for it. That last 20%, especially when it comes to cutting the reliability, there's no plan. So, the way I interpreted that is, the UN's out there with the COP, whatever you're at now, 22, 16, 15. I mean, there's been so many of these conferences that the UN quote unquote binding agreements, we're going to come to literally a Y in the road here, where these power companies are going to have to choose to continue to abide by the UN mandates from the COP conferences and start cutting the reliability and delivery of power to us here in the United States, in the different states participating with the TVA and the power stations at 150 some companies. Or we're going to say, United Nations, take a leap off the big cliff, and we're going to go and do our own thing. And hey, by the way, we might actually start firing up some of our natural gas facilities again. That's where it's coming to, from that 80% to that 100% after 2030. But you have to think about right now, the peak max power load that couldn't even be achieved and met and kept the power on during this Christmas, these storms are going to get more intense. Now, if you're going to subtract let's say 1.5%, 1.5%, 1.5% per year from now to meet that 2030 goal, that's 70%. So that means you're going to have to subtract at least 1.5% off your peak load capacity per year, which means that if we get into any of these storms again, that type of load is going to be nowhere near. We're going to go into rolling brownouts and blackouts. Instead of being 1 hour, half hour, whatever it was, it'll be more like a 4-hour block. That's the scary thing coming forward, moving into these non-reliable power sources. And even their table on the uncertainty, see, the electrical demand, especially when you move into these cuts, is going to be, number one, electrical demand, energy requirements. Yes, indeed. That is going to be a very uncertain benchmark moving forward, subtracting 1.5% off your max capacity. And I highlighted also the regulation price of CO2, this cap and trade legislation, but it seems to be already in their formula for operation costs. Now, if we do look at the Climate Adaptation 2022 Progress Update, we see local governments for sustainability. So in the fine print, the local governments for sustainability are assisting the local power companies associated with the TVA, not the TVA itself. So I'll let you decipher that one, and we'll go over to the network local regional governments. So it does seem to have a global fingerprint, just like the United Nations. And if you dive into the ECLI site here, the featured global activities that are involved with the same are Cities and Regions Roadmap 100% Renewable, Carbon Neutral Center, Climate Neutrality Framework, and the City Climate Partner Program. So you can see the intertwining of international organizations with power providers. So again, I'll ask you the question. What do we really need to do to get to that point where when we come to this divide in the road, there's another possibility instead of having to reduce power based on international agreements versus our own state or sovereign needs first? Oh, Nikola Tesla motors running on the Earth's magnetic field. That would be a good start. Patents amok, which I linked below in the description box, so you can click and go on every single patent that Nikola Tesla has out there with diagram schematics so you can build your own. And I'm wondering why since 1888 these working models have not been improved on, or maybe they have but haven't made it out into public usage. Because spinning magnets, just like you did as a kid in class on your desk, they pushed each other away when they got close. Well, this is what you're looking at here. But we could do it even faster and better with electromagnets. And if you didn't like that old parchment from 1888 to 1889, here you go. Black and white, easier to read, huh? Still viable. Imagine the circuitry and componentry that we have today. But if we want to go back to burning wood like they're doing in Europe, hey, that's fine too. Because when I look at the magnetic motors, I see two things happening. One, all these rare earth minerals that we need for the solar panels, the windmills, and all these types that we don't need that any longer. You need basic construction materials with metals. Nickel, steel, aluminum, copper, just like we're doing today, and look at the value on that comparatively to molybdenum, osmium, iridium, etc. And using new technologies to assist us, we could wire that down to 1/10,000th of 1 second in a rotation on the magnetic decoupling to move that plate forward attached to a spindle, and we don't have to burn anything to create that steam now, do we? But again, we're all at behest of China. Look at the processing and refining of key metals. Copper China, nickel China, cobalt China, rare earths China, lithium China. Time to get back to the Earth. Magnetic field, that is. I'm really super shocked that you might say, well, those patents don't work. Then they would have improved on them by now. Well, I was in Zagreb in Croatia. Went down to Nikola Tesla's laboratory, there at the museum, and in front of you are 16 working models. 16 running off the Earth's magnetic field. Still working, still spinning. Maybe it's the supply chain that's so elusive to get around, and the participants and how much money flows in there. But, within our lifetimes, we are going to have to come to some other conclusion of implementing systems that allow our civilization to continue forward versus full collapse. That's our two choices. Move away from the greed involved with suppression of technologies. In my personal opinion, you can say that whatever you like, water burning engines, hydrogen on demand, magnetic motors, there's many. You probably have a much longer list than I do, many of you out there. But it's truly going to come down to the collapse of civilization, down literally to the Dark Ages, sleeping in the back of the barn on the straw with your pigs, or we move forward and talk about reliability. Imagine installing one of those units in a single home. Would you pay for it? That's not metered. You know what I mean? You get back to this whole loop again. We wouldn't even need any of the cables above our head. We wouldn't need any copper cabling on the planet had this moved forward since 1888, 1890. Power on demand in your home with no meters, cables. Imagine how much money you would save and how much more freedom you would have in your life if you weren't always paying for gasoline, electricity. How much do you think you spent on a lifetime of that already, just on those 2 metered things? I do appreciate you watching. Hope you got something out of the video. And speaking of the times of collapse, my Patriot Supply and Adapt 2030 3-month emergency food supply. That link's in the description box below, along with all the Nikola Tesla patents. And join us every Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight, streaming on 8 different platforms. YouTube's one of those. Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast channel, MIAC podcast, 10 p.m. to midnight. We'll see you there. Bye for now.